rhetoric or I'ma have a flashback. Digging through the dresser like fuck it, where my mask at? Then mash back with the banger and damage shit and say fuck everything I learned in anger management. Hop back on some east side Dannon shit and push a nigga's top back when I let the cannon spit. Start planning shit, premeditation. I'm in love with the streets again, rededication.
Now, just out of curiosity, I know that at different prisons, the prices on phones are different, considering the availability of the phone on that particular prison. At CMC, I paid $600 for a little Verizon flip phone back in 2011. So what was the prices up there
in Soledad?
In Soledad.
Well, there was a lot of phones, so it was cheap, like $8, $9 sometimes less. It depended on the inflow.
$800,
$900.
And you say that's cheap?
That was, well, I mean, that was
at that time.
That was cheap for a smart. For a flip,
oh, a smartphone.
Like, yeah,
okay.
for
smartphone.
Flips, maybe $400, $500.
Right.
But I mean, the prices stayed on the lower end there because it was a very large yard, and there was a lot of different things happening.
Right. Because I've heard some people say that in prison, through maybe a course of 15, or maybe through a course of maybe 15 months, 2 years, they literally had 10, 15 cell phones.
Oh yeah, I went through 5, and it's from 2008 I had my first flip. Then I went to the shoe. 2014 I got my next phone. Got caught. I had like 5 phones before I paroled.
Right. So okay, you say you were locked up in 2003.
Mm-hmm.
So you had came into prison already kind of having a cell phone.
Yeah.
Because when I came to prison.
Oh no, there were no cell phones back then. I had like the little ones.
Right.
Little like Nokias and stuff.
Right.
But yeah, not like it is now. Smartphones and shit. That was something whole nother level. So.
Because I kind of want you to talk a little bit about, for a person like, because I know you've probably been around, for a guy who maybe been in prison 15, 20 years, 25 years, and suddenly he gets a cell phone, and I know for me it became addicting.
Oh, for
being
sure.
able to call home and talk as long as you want to, because we are allowed 15 minutes on the phone, and that call goes by so fast when you have so many people to talk to. Then all of a sudden the phone also has these social media capabilities. So what was that like? How was a cell phone in prison?
It felt like the wall was breaking down. I was able to talk to people I hadn't talked to since I got busted. The relationship.
Were you now, when you got your cell phone, not to cut you off, were you trying to call to the streets and get people killed?
Nah.
Because see, that's what the administration says.
They say that
the
shit.
average person just wants to get a hold of some people. He wants to try to get in touch with a girl.
Yeah.
And that's all we want to do.
100%.
Play
Get
some
a visit,
video games, watch
get some money
movies.
on your books, watch movies, whatever. The most simplistic things that you get taken from you, you want to add back to your life, and it adds great value. Like I used to with my wife, we used to watch movies, and when we watch movies, she'd rent the movie that was on our movie channel, and I would leave the phone on and put it on mute. She'd put hers on mute, and we would just watch it together. So and that was a huge part of our relationship.
It just having something to talk about. So it's just,
absolutely.
And that's what they don't understand. Even though of course cell phones are against the law, or excuse me, against the rules in prison, we're just trying to have a bit of normalcy in our life. So absolutely. Like you said, she'd be at home. She'd, hey babe, let's watch this movie, and so you guys was, because it was something you could have really done apart, but it's bond forming,
Absolutely.
And they don't understand when we come to prison, we lose those certain special bonds, like you say, that a lot of people take for granted.
Yeah. So
she would say, hey, let's watch this movie. So you guys would sit down, you wouldn't even really be on the phone talking.
Not
She'd
really.
watch the movie, you'd watch the movie, then you guys, it would connect you guys. And so those phones, I know, became extremely important to the people that could get them. So were you addicted, you would say, to your cell phone?
I'd say I was addicted. I mean, I couldn't foresee my relationship maintaining through collect calls. I tried a few times to just take a step back and just use the collect calls, but it's not the same. The lady interrupting all the time, 15 minutes, a fucking line or a sign-up list, wherever you're at is different. But it just wasn't the same. So I mean, I used phones all the way up to like 2 weeks before I paroled.
Right. So what's the sign-up list you said?
Like when you sign up for a phone, they pass the list around and they have you sign up for different slots. So it'll start at a different cell every day. So if it starts way far away from your cell, all the good slots are taken.
So by the time you maybe for instance your wife or significant other or whoever, she may work between certain hours.
Yeah. So you're not able to get on.
You might need a phone call at 9 in the morning, or you may need one at 8 o'clock. And so if you're in cell 55 and they're starting at cell 56, which is right in front of you, they got to go all the way around. So by the time they get back to you, it might only be
no 9 o'clock slot.
A clock at 6 in the morning.
Exactly.
So explain the anguish too of, okay, You signed up for an 8 o'clock phone call. You know you got a time, you got a slot. Now you can make a call. Now, so your phone call in some prisons you only get one call a day. Some prisons 2 calls a day. But let's say you're at one a day. Your call is at 8 o'clock. At 7:45, some dudes go to fight.
Yeah.
They put the yard down. You lose your time. How is that? People don't understand. How is that? That's like so mentally anguishing. Like, oh damn, I missed my phone call.
You feel like it always feels like the walls are just going to come tumbling down. Any relationship that you build, no matter how stable, you're like, damn, this could be it. Like it becomes too much because you know that you're asking whoever else, family member, wife, whoever, you're asking them to invest in you, and that process is hard. Like their investment is a lot more. Like you just have to go to yard and use the phone. There's stress involved, but they have to put their whole life aside while they're waiting for you to come home. So I always felt like, I can speak for myself, I always felt like when I missed those calls, like that could be the nail in the coffin.
A phone call that made this relationship.
Yep, absolutely. Or when you get in an argument on the phone.
Hey, it's crazy that you said that. 'Cause that was my next question. So what is it like when you get into an argument on the phone with your, your wife, your significant other, and then you can't get back on the phone? I know me, it would be eating away. So now I'm standing around, I'm looking, I'm hoping that somebody can let me use their phone call, but especially a night phone call is precious.
Yeah, absolutely.
Ain't nobody giving up no night phone calls in there.
Nope.
So, and then like you say now, so they may have started 2 cells in front of your cell. So now for the next 3-4 days, they're starting far away. So any slot you get, you can't use. So what is the anguish like of waiting maybe 3 or 4 days?
For, man. Like I will vent on some letters because the 3 or 4 day shot between phone calls is rough, and that's what cell phones do. Like they fill that gap. They make it you able to establish a solid communication line with someone who you otherwise might not be able to. And like I'll vent in a letter. I'll get it all out. I'll put my mind on a letter, and sometimes that makes me feel better. But you'll be miserable for 3-4 days. That full time, like there's no, oh well, I'll deal with it when I get to it. It's literally like you are in your head spinning for that whole time.
You can't get rid of it. What was visits like for you? Because I know for me, they were the most joyous time in prison. I never wasted any of my time arguing and fighting on a visit. I enjoyed my visits so much. What were they like for you?
They were about the same. I think that like the visiting room, I mean, with the cops and what they go through to get in there, that's one thing. But once you're there, you eat some of that crappy food. You get to just talk and just be out of prison. Everybody in that room is just trying to forget where they're at. Even though we're all in blues, you're just trying to be out of prison with the loved one that's there.
It's like we're being made human again, man. And I know like some of the most depressing moments for me, and not necessarily for me per se, where after the end of the visit, to watch my family leave, they'd be, especially my daughter, she'd be so sad. She'd be crying. She hated to leave me up in there. And that was depressing to me, knowing that this pain that I put on her. So how was that for you?
That was hard. My wife had an ability to just shut off. She's like, okay, it's time to go. I'm gone. And I would just be looking at her, but like, I think that was her coping mechanism. Like, I'm not just going to dwell in how shitty it is to leave. Like, I'll go and I'll come back. But I would be, I'd be glowing on the way back to the building, but also kind of like, man, I just wish I was back there. Like, I just want to be back in that room. Yeah.
But, well, okay, so you was sentenced to what is known in California as a determinate sentence. So that meant you knew when you were getting out. What was the mindset of like that? Was it like, okay, were you like we see in the movies, were you marking your calendar down? Because me,
I wasn't.
I dealt with it just like I didn't know when I was getting out. It's what I signed up for, and I was dealing with it day by day. So what was it like for you knowing that you were gonna get out at some point in time?
I dealt with it similar to how you did, because I didn't really count my date as a date. I didn't really, until Lynn and I got married, I didn't really think about going home. That wasn't something that, I wasn't planning a life out here. It was like, if I make it there, cool, and if I don't, then I don't. I knew what my date was, somewhere between 2019 and 2021. I knew that would be my...
That sounds far away even now, and it's 2020.
Yeah, it's 2021 right now, yeah.
So you got sentenced in 2003.
No, I got sentenced to the long term in 2005.
2005, and they told you your date is 2021. That must have seemed forever.
Yeah, and it was 2019 to 20, and I almost maxed out. I got some time back because of Prop 57 and classes. I was like cycling groups as much as I could. But yeah, I mean, legitimately up until like midpoint in Soledad and CTF, I wasn't really focused on going home. That was not, my focus was on being who I was being, which was Casper. I wanted to, make my name, make sure nobody fucked with me, make sure nobody crossed lines with me, and that was it. Like, that was all. And then at some point, about year 2, when I started attending groups, I started thinking, like, there could be more to this. Like, I could start thinking outside the box. And the thing I want to point out about groups in prison is, for one, all of them are started by people who are incarcerated or people in the community who have loved ones who are incarcerated that brought stuff back in for us, right? It's not started by the guards, it's not started by CDCR. They're not doing anything about our rehabilitation. We are doing everything about our rehabilitation. So that said, these groups were communities of people who were incarcerated serving life sentences, some 76 to life, 45 to life. And we're like, hey, we want to go home someday, and this is what we're doing to do that. And so getting engaged in those conversations created a light at the end of the tunnel that I hadn't seen. Because they'd tell me stuff like, you know, you have a date, you are going home, like, you need to focus on that. And I never really had viewed it that way before. But for folks, like, when you're around people who don't have a date and they have the light at the end of the tunnel, it almost encourages you to go, look, I can do that too. You know what I mean?
Right. Because, you know, like I say, I came to prison with a life sentence in '96, but when I came to prison, even though I was sentenced to life with the possibility of parole, no one who had life was going home.
They weren't going home back then.
They was being systematically denied.
Mm-hmm.
And so at some point in time, they came up with these self-help groups. And so it was basically mandatory. It wasn't mandatory, but it was basically mandatory for the parole board, for
mm-hmm.
anybody that had life. If you didn't take certain groups, you weren't going nowhere. Because after you take a group, they give you a chrono, which
mm-hmm.
is basically a certificate of completion.
Mm-hmm.
And I was always extremely impressed with a person who was taking a group who didn't have life, because that person was getting out regardless. And I must admit, if I didn't have life, I wouldn't have took one group. So I was always impressed with people who didn't have life, who were actually in the group to better themselves.
That's awesome.
You know, so how do you think those groups eventually, because I know at some point in time, initially I believe when we took those groups, we all kind of bucked against them.
Oh, yeah,
so at some point in time, once you started realizing, okay, well, some of these groups is helpful, what do you think, what was the most that you pulled from those groups? How did they help you when you were released?
Well, for one, I was able through AA and NA to process trauma, to process
what's
things.
What's AA and NA for those who may not know?
Alcoholics Anonymous and Narcotics Anonymous. I mostly went to AA, and through those programs, like, they work at the prison I was at, they'd work a rigorous 12-step program, which means, like, you are fully engaged. You had a sponsor. You walked through the steps with them. A step 4 is like super deep, like you are digging into yourself, you're working through past traumas, how it affected you, and what your part was. So, like, the idea of responsibility and accountability was completely foreign to me before I did that. Participating in other groups, like, I was able to vision cast and decide what I wanted to do with my life. I'd never in my life thought about who I wanted to be outside of Casper and what I wanted to do that was good. And those groups allowed space for me to throw some ideas on the table, some of them good, some of them not.
Right.
But ultimately, through the process of these conversations with people, I was able to see that I want something more than just this limited existence that I was doing. And the most important thing I learned from those groups is the premise of toxic masculinity, because I figured out that that's what I'm doing. Like, I'm modeling masculinity, I'm modeling what I think a man is supposed to be based on what society has told me it is.
And what are some of those things?
So, ability to be violent is one of those things. So the more violent you are, the more man you are. Objectification of women, that sounds super scientific, but basically if you can pull girls, then you're a dude, like, you're one of those dudes, like, you're a guy. If you can't fight and you can pull girls, you're good, right?
Right.
And then pursuit of money, like, if I could get more money, that makes my status, that creates my status. And the reality of modeling that behavior, for one, in terms of masculinity, is super limited, because we have a full range of emotions that we're shutting off just to do those things, and we have a full range of needs and wants societally that we shut off so that we could do those things. And furthermore, we're harming people. We're harming women when we objectify them. We're harming others when we fight them or stab them or kill them or whatever it be. And the pursuit of money is such a dry game, right? Like, none of those things really matter, and we place those as the pinnacle of what makes a man. And in challenging that and realizing that it's just a mask that I'm putting on, I was able to step outside and start emoting in a way, like working, talking with my wife, talking with my peers about things that I really wanted, things that really hurt me, that scared me, whatever, in a way where I didn't feel threatened, right? And I had never had that before in my life. I'd been modeling that shit since I was 14 years old. That allowed me to put down the gang mentality that I was living by, the racism that I was living by, drug addiction, everything. I was able to put all that aside and figure out where it came from and process it with a group of people just like me who were in prison and not be a threat for it. Like, I was always worried that if I talked about feelings, makes you weak, right? That is not the case.
Right. So, and that's what I was going to say, because you mentioned toxic masculinity, and so in prison, how important is that, portraying this tough guy image, being macho, being willing to fight? Because I know being in prison, violence is something that you get accepted.
Yeah.
Regardless of what race, Crip, blood, white, black, Asian, Hispanic. If you're violent, you're respected, you're admired, you're feared. So how important was that in prison?
It is very important. What I did find through the process of going, through the educational steps and, the deep introspection that it took for me to get to a point where I was challenging that, what I was able to find is it's not as important as people think. Like, I imagined that everybody would immediately turn on me the second that I stopped doing that shit. That was not the case, or at least for me. Maybe for some others it was the case, but what became more important to me was my top 5 was the people and the goals that I have in life. The top 5 people and the top 5 goals that I have in life. And if I was living for those things, I wasn't modeling that behavior, because that behavior hurt them.
Right.
And so once I started thinking like that, I didn't receive a whole lot of backlash when I stepped away from everything. There were people who didn't like me, who didn't fuck with me, whatever. I don't really care, because it wasn't about their image of respect. It was about my top 5. So, prison is a pretty brutal environment. They dress it like it's everything, but my belief firmly is that everybody is modeling that shit in there, and also everybody intuitively knows that that's not all that life is modeling that shit, right? And when you step outside of that, life becomes so much more rich and full. I couldn't imagine going back into that frame of thinking.
Right. And so what was it like? Because like you said something that was extremely important. You said that as men growing up, we weren't pretty much allowed to talk about our emotions, or we'd be labeled this, we'd be labeled that, and this and that is basically weak. You're a punk, because we're supposed to stuff our emotions, not cry, don't talk about things that hurt us. Man up. So what was it like in these groups to see some of these guys get up and say, hey man, you know what? I'm human too, man. It hurts me when XYZ happens, man. What was it like being able to see these, these tough guys on the yard, maybe that you have been known for years, be able to come forward and say, hey man, I have emotions?
It was at first uncomfortable and then refreshing. And I think that that's the experience that other people have too. I can't speak for other people. I can speak for myself. First, it was a bit uncomfortable because when you put that stuff down deep inside, you blunt that shit and it doesn't grow. Like, you are stunting your emotional growth. But as you go forward in time, you start feeling refreshed, because you're like, I know this to be true, what this person is saying, and I feel the same. So that point of relation becomes everything.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And so I'm going to ask you this: during your time of incarceration, did you ever do time with any so-called famous people, or any inmates who had a lot of notoriety, or just people who had extraordinary penitentiary reputations, anything like that?
Not that I could think of.
Not
that I could think of.
A lot of people want to know about Wes Watson. Did you ever run across Wes Watson? Did you know Wes Watson?
No, I didn't.
Know Wes Watson?
No.
Let me see else what I got here for you. Okay, so what about when you were in the white supremacy? Did you have to earn certain tattoos? Were there things that you... So all tattoos...
So every tattoo on my body is earned. Different things for different... Like, this is a time stamp. This means 10 years as a skinhead. There's a whole bunch of different political meanings behind these. I could go on for hours talking about all those.
Right.
But basically, violence is one way. Loyalty and violence are the two ways that you earn that stuff. So usually putting in work will get you letters, will get you symbols, whatever symbols you want. Varying degrees of work. Certain acts and riots will get you other things. That's pretty much, yeah, every tattoo is based off of that. And I'm from here down is everything, my whole body.
Right. So let me ask you this. Say a guy had maybe a tattoo on him symbolizing something he didn't earn. Was there a type of way he could possibly be checked?
That happens a lot, and the way you do it is you just, what's the paperwork for that? Like, because you get paperwork on everything that you've done.
Right.
So you get a 115 or a case off of it, and if they don't have it, if they don't have anybody who's co-signed their shit from their area, so if they're from IE, someone from IE would co-sign their shit.
Right.
If they don't have that, then they put in work, and they have to earn it. Right. So it'd be like post-incident, like you'd have it already and then you would go earn it.
Right. And so basically a 115 is a disciplinary action in prison. So I'm sure you did as I did. Each time you went to the hole, you kept all this paperwork because it's like to prove as what you had done when you went to another prison. You know, they want to know, hey, where you coming from and blah blah blah. And so your paperwork was kind of basically like your prison resume.
Exactly. Yeah, and I probably still have all that shit upstairs, but it's a stack. There's a lot.
Right.
Yep.
So let me see what I got here else. Oh, okay. Are there any prisons in the California system that were more popular for whites, or you felt had a higher number of whites, or ran by whites? Because I've always heard that High Desert. I've always heard that Susanville was a prison where the guards would actually bring the white inmates knives and weapons and stuff like that.
I don't know if that's true or not. I wouldn't say it's not true. I wouldn't say it's true, but I know that there's a higher population of whites. Also, most of the guards are white. The whole community is built. It's mostly white folk. They're hella racist. They say racist stuff. They favor white folk. Tracy was that way. There was a lot of whites in Tracy when I was there.
Right.
But majority of the time, there was like on a 1,200 person yard, maybe 100 whites.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. So, at one of these prisons that were more white, how many whites would you say were on the yard?
I'm trying to think about Tracy because it was a while ago. I'd say with the gym alone, there was probably in a 524 person tank, there was 100 whites, which makes them a fifth of the population, which is pretty good numbers. Out of 524 people, 100 whites.
Right.
And that was the only place I've ever been where Southerners were not the majority.
Right. Wow.
Yeah.
So, Hefe, you standing behind the camera, man. Are there any questions that you have?
Hefe the shooter is ready. All right. So, what was your first fight experience like in prison?
My first fight was a removal, and it was on D-Yard and Sentinella.
So when you say a removal, for those who may not be familiar with prison terms, what's a removal?
A removal is where they send 2 or 3 people on one person, and they just obliterate or stab him.
So basically, they're trying to get that one undesired person off the yard.
The
He's committed some type of infraction that's not cool.
Yeah.
And so he's getting removed from the yard now.
Yeah. And on this case, something came in about this person, something they had done in another prison that they were at, or in county jail or something. I can't remember what it was, but they put me on it. So I went back to my cell and I packed my stuff because I know I'd be going to the hole. And we went and did our thing. So when you say
you pack your stuff, elaborate on that.
So you take your whole cell and you because the cops go through all that shit. So if you bag it, you know that they're less likely to throw your shit away.
Right.
So I just bagged everything discreetly, and then at the yard release, I went out and saw him. We waited for him to get to a point where he was furthest away from cops. Came up on him from both sides.
And that was because so you guys can have the most amount of time to do damage.
Exactly.
Right. Okay.
Exactly.
Right.
And we came up on him in what's called a blind spot, meaning that the tower can't necessarily see exactly.
So you have more time to put your foot in his ass.
So you have more time before they fire block or fire the mini.
Wow. Okay.
I put hands and feet on him.
Right. And so this removal, like I don't know exactly how many prisons it is in California, maybe 32, 33. So basically, explain that a little bit. So regardless of what you do, at some type of way, at some prison, it's gonna eventually catch up with you.
Prison is a super small world,
and this was before the cell phones.
Yeah, absolutely. Prison's super small. I mean, if you think about it, most people in prison are doing a length of time. So as they go forward, they'll move 3 or 4 spots. I hit 14 spots because I was in 14 prisons.
Can you just out of curiosity, can you name off those prisons?
Wasco, Delano, Calapat, Sentinella, Corcoran, Tracy. Where else was I? Fuck, I can't remember.
CMC, Soledad.
There's more.
So basically
Tehachapi.
you done 15 years.
I've done 15, but
and 14 prisons.
Yeah.
So you was pretty active. You was moving around. I mean, because most times when a person moves from prison to prison is because he's likely getting in some type of trouble.
Yeah.
You're getting kicked out, you're getting shipped here. So that's really, I've done 24 years and I'll probably only hit 6-7 prisons. So for 14, 15 prisons in a 14, 15 year span, you stayed in a lot of trouble. You were active, and you were getting shipped around a lot.
A lot, yeah. And it was just the way it was. There's also Tehachapi and Corcoran because I was in the shoe on both of those and on the main line on both of those. I'm losing somewhere.
Right.
Chino, I forgot Chino. Anyways, but yeah, so I moved around a lot, and pretty much that's just you pass information as you go. Did you hear about such and such? And it's a really informal thing, but word travels.
So okay, so just for instance, you may be at Tehachapi. You go, you find out you're leaving. You're going to, for instance, Calipat. So maybe some of your higher ups or whoever, they say, well, hey man, we heard such and such is at Calipat. Take this kite, which is basically a note with information on it, down to such and such, and pass this kite along, and that's how word travels.
Absolutely.
Right. So you may be 500 miles away in Pelican Bay, but like I say, now you're going to Calipat.
Going somewhere, exactly.
And so they're spreading this information out. So that's how they catch up with Jimmy, who done this up here 9 months ago. So now he thinks he's cool. But the word is eventually gonna catch up with him.
100%.
So on this removal, did you guys say anything to the guy? Or you just wait for him
Nothing.
to get?
We just moved on him. He was shocked because we fucked with him. Like, we worked out with him and everything.
Wow. So hold on. You guys worked out with this guy?
Yeah, we worked out with him and everything before that. Like, he was
how long?
Probably, he was there for about a month, and then word got
So
there.
he gets there, he shows up, hey, I'm such and such.
I'm crashed, and
I'm
then
cool,
we
and
worked
so
out.
everybody's hanging out, and then suddenly the shoe drops, some shit pulls up.
And he had no idea, because it just went from the person who got the kite to the yard, and then to us, and we just moved.
And that's how I explained that what's so cold about prison, you guys, is that from 1 second this guy may be your buddy, and you have no intention of harming this dude, but then suddenly some information shows up that he broke an infraction.
You'll be the first one that they asked to do it,
yeah,
because you're closest to him.
And he's never gonna suspect it. And so how is that, like, on your conscience wise? Is it I mean, because we know that's how prison is, but how do you deal with that? I mean, is it just business, never personal, or?
Well, at the time, at a young age, it's easier to swallow up the business idea.
Right.
And then you get older, and you start feeling bad about stuff. Like, the stuff that you've been pushing down starts building up. So, I mean, in terms of today, the harm that I caused, the things that I did to people, I live a life where I never perpetuate that kind of behavior, for one, and for two, I own it. I own it openly. I don't brag about it, because I feel like it's a testament to the survivors of harm that I've done harm to for me to own that and take accountability without making them look less than or anything, or making myself sound big for doing it, because these are things I did. They aren't who I am.
Right. So excuse me, but like, so and I know this also. So when we're younger, we're like, it's part of the game. It's what we signed up for, and we think less about it. And the reason we think less about it is sad to say, but we believe in what we're doing, or we wouldn't be doing it.
For sure.
And that's what a lot of people, like I say, these people who get at me with these free world solutions to these locked up problems. Sometimes, now that we're older, we'll realize, hey, you know what? I was wrong for doing that. But at the time, it's what this guy signed up for. It's what I signed up for. He knew the rules like I knew the rules.
Exactly.
Had I been the one who broke the infraction, it would have been me with the foot in my ass.
For sure.
And so that's just how it goes.
And when you're young, it's easier to do that. Even if you don't believe in it all the way, you want to believe in it. Because I feel like kids, specifically kids from the age of 16 to, let's say, 30, you're looking for something to invest in. And that is the perfect avenue, because it's easy to understand, it's easy to climb the ranks, it's not difficult, it's not a difficult path, and you're able to attain some status that maybe you'll never get in real life on the streets. Maybe you'll be working in a moving company for your entire life out here, scraping to make bills, but in there you have status and you have respect because of the things that you do. So it's easy to invest in something, even if you don't believe in it fully.
Right, and then also I want to say, so with each state boot you put in a motherfucker's glutes, you get more
time.
You get
more status.
You get more status. So
For sure.
The more ass you kick,
state boot you put in glutes. I like that.
Each time you put a state boot in a motherfucker's glute, you're more respected by your peers.
That.
Like, oh yeah, he's the shit. This dude right here, he's with the business, and we get rewarded for being violent in prison.
Absolutely.
And so for people who can't understand, this is why this stuff is perpetuated. One of my buddies used to say, nobody went to prison for doing their best thinking.
That's
so
true.
You guys are trying to talk to us sensible and argue us and get mad at us. We're not in prison for being smart at that time. And then once prison is you join a certain, whether it's a tennis club, whether it's a bankers club, whether it's a bikers club, a golf club, you must do what the golfers are doing to be accepted.
Absolutely.
If you're not gonna do what this club is doing, you're not gonna be allowed.
Yeah.
But prison is a club, when you don't fit in, it's gonna get ugly for you.
Ugly.
And so it's a sense of survival too.
More and more today, I'm seeing people be able to stand on their own 2 feet and make a decision for that. The prison system has drastically changed. I encourage that. Like, I encourage people to stand up and value the things that are most important to them, the people that are most important to them, and not invest in these microsystems, right? But at a young age, it's a really hard curve to get over. Like, it's really difficult to get over the idea that I'm not going to be liked by this whole group of people if I don't do these things.
Right.
You know, but I mean, how much of our life do we want to spend investing in doing things to make other people happy?
Right. So what I wanted to ask was, have you ever removed somebody or seen somebody who was removed on the yard, a white inmate, and then bumped into him later on down the line? And if so, how does that go? I mean, is he allowed, once he gets his discipline, he gets his removal, is he allowed now to come back to the yard? Or
it depends on
that?
That's a good question. It depends on the instances, like what he did. More often than not, if it's not like telling on someone or some heinous crime, they can come back. And I've ran into a couple people, and usually the same thing. It was just business, nothing personal, just business.
So
they may not like me.
They know, but I mean, in their hearts, they know they fucked up. So
Absolutely.
maybe if a guy owed a debt, and you guys had to kick his ass, and so he's allowed to come back to another prison.
Sure, absolutely.
And he, like you say, he knew the rules like you knew the rules. So he knew he shouldn't have ran up a debt.
Yeah.
So he still may have a grudge, but in his mind, he accepts.
But there's no avenue for retaliation for that person.
Right.
So.
Right.
Yeah.
And so, Hefe, hit us with another question, man.
Okay, I'm going down the list. How was your first riot?
It was intense. It was intense. Like, it went really, really fast, but it wasn't really, really fast. Like I said, it was 56 minutes. I had no idea that it had been that long. Time kind of just flies, you know? Like, you're really on survival thinking. It was intense. It's the most... At the end of it, I was excited about it, but during it, fear was the main thing that was keeping me pushing. Like, if this is fucking scary shit, I'm just gonna stay alive as much as I can.
Yeah. All right. This is a question, I guess, for both of y'all. Do you think it's possible for like the racists to ever come together in prison?
I think it's possible. Do I think it'll happen? No, but I do think it's possible. You know, I don't think the guards want it to happen. I don't think the administration wants it to happen, because then now our focus is not on each other, it's on them, you know. And he can speak more to, I think a good topic is when the racists came together for that hunger strike.
Yeah, the hunger strike was was a key point where everybody decided, whatever our difference is, we aren't the enemy. The enemy is those that are keeping us oppressed.
And so why was the hunger strike? And speak for those who don't know, you know, elaborate on a little bit of why it was, what brought it up, and all that type of stuff.
It was organized because of living conditions in the SHU. So they had this thing called an indeterminate SHU for folks who were validated. And when someone's validated in a prison gang, they would keep them in the SHU. So you had anybody...
So what's an indeterminate SHU?
Indeterminate means you're in the SHU forever. And they never release you unless you become inactive or drop out or debrief.
Right. So you can literally sit in the SHU
for 20
years.
20 some odd years. And
wow.
You've seen plenty of people who are on the line right now who are in there for, and it's not just that you sit in there for that amount of years. The majority of people aren't prison gang members or even associates. Their names were on a list, they got caught, or someone went SMY or locked it up, went and told on themselves and dropped a name just to get off the yard. And it wasn't true, but they're sitting on indeterminate SHUs.
So because I know what you're talking about, but so for the listeners who may not, so a person, in order to go SMY, which is special needs yard, a person, a lot of times the administration wants information.
Yes.
You want to leave this yard, a person will go and say it's unsafe for me. Well, why is it unsafe? So they want information.
Yeah.
So a person may falsely go and say, hey man, Casper is doing XYZ.
Absolutely.
And Casper's not doing shit.
Yes.
But by this information, they will come and they call that in prison validating. They will validate you to be, because it's okay to be a gang member from the street, but they don't want you to be a gang member from a gang that was created for prison. Mm-hmm. So now if they can prove that you are, they will throw you in the SHU
forever. Yeah. And then the living conditions in the SHU, really small portions, really shitty guards, not like yard wasn't as consistent.
You guys
as
got nothing coming.
You got nothing coming. And their argument was, you're in the SHU, like this is just how it is. So the hunger strike was orchestrated to both change the living conditions as well as to get people out of the SHU, to create a path so that people could get out of the SHU. And it did just that. Like, there is nobody sitting on an indeterminate SHU. What are you doing back there, Coco? There's nobody sitting on an indeterminate SHU anymore today. SHU terms were cut in half. So if you have a 36-month SHU, you're going to do 18 months in there now, like you do halftime. And none of that was the case before. You did 75% or the whole SHU.
So was they like complaining about the SHU due to some of the psychological aspect it had?
Absolutely. It's definitely sensory deprivation. It's trauma. Like if you think of locking yourself in a closet at your house for 24 years, like a person would go crazy, right?
Right.
And so they offer us little things like, oh, 3 hours in a cage on the yard, but you have no human contact.
Right.
You're shackled everywhere you go.
And it's intentionally designed to do
It's
this.
intentionally designed to treat people like animals. And when people are treated like animals, they act like animals.
Of course.
So you're perpetuating a mentality. You're recreating the violence on a daily basis.
Right.
Shoes were some of the most violent places in the prison system.
And then, so of course, okay, so everybody in the shoe doesn't necessarily have a life sentence, right?
True.
So okay, so you can have a person who has a 20-year sentence. He gets an indeterminate shoe. He goes to the shoe for 13 years straight. Then they release him back to society
And say, figure it out.
and they want him to go out there and be productive.
Yeah.
And not get in any trouble.
Absolutely. And they don't give him any tools, any of the wherewithal. They don't prepare you beforehand. You don't have an ID. You're hit with the 40,000 obstacles that every person that's released on parole is hit with. And then you have all of that trauma to deal with too.
Wow.
So more than likely, you're right back within maybe 6 months because you don't
Yep.
have the tools. So then comes what they call recidivism.
Yep.
You return to prison and they.
Process you all again, and if you're validated, you go right back to
So
the
now,
ship.
if you, so hold on. So if you're validated from the last time, when you come back on a new beef, even
Right
though
back
I
in.
ain't done nothing, they
Right
throw
back
you
in the
right
ship.
back into the ship.
Yep.
Wow. And so now, so if you come back with another 14-year sentence, you're right back in the shoe for that whole 14 years again.
Yes.
Even though whatever you've done on your last term, wow.
That's
Wow.
crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so that was the system that they had. The hunger strikes, which were orchestrated throughout the state of
So
California.
who all participated in the hunger strike?
Just
all
about
races, you
everybody,
said?
everybody.
Okay.
And I mean, some sat out. I'm sure that Bulldogs probably weren't that involved. Bulldogs being Fresno, like gangs. Certain Fresno gangs didn't get involved, but I know Northerners, Southerners, whites, blacks all got involved. Others to greater or lesser degrees. And the goal was to make sure that they knew that they couldn't do this to us, and it worked.
Right. Now I heard a few people who participated in the hunger strike did pass away.
Absolutely.
Right. Wow. So they were
From
serious.
malnutrition.
They were serious about the hunger strike,
Wow.
and so they've done that as a sacrifice. So maybe the next person a year down the line
wouldn't have to do that.
Wow. Wow.
And it worked. It worked. I mean, and all the stuff that they're doing in the system now is retaliation for what happened in the hunger strike. All of this non-designated yard stuff,
Right.
where they're mixing SNY and GP and certain treatment towards people who got out of the shoe. Like that is all so that they can say, oh, we were right. They should have been in the shoe all along. But ultimately, there was a great period of peace after everybody got out of the shoe.
So how long were you were you a participant of the hunger strike?
was.
And then at that time, how long were you in the hole when in the shoe, excuse me, when the hunger strike was first created?
I was in there for about 4 years when the hunger strike started.
Wow. So just imagine that. I mean, like he said, some people done 20 years, but even just imagine 4 years. The most I ever done in the hole, because I never had a shoe term. The most I ever done in the hole was about 5 or 6 months. So imagine even 4 years.
Absolutely.
Wow. Were you allowed to have your TV and that type of stuff?
You could have your TV. You get packages once a year.
Once a year. Now, see, normally we get packages every quarter. There's 4 quarters. So every 90 days, or is it, excuse me, every 120 days, you can get a package. And a package is, initially when I came to prison, your family from the street could send a 30-pound box full of certain goodies. They, food, tennis shoes, Kool-Aid, chips, candy. And then initially they started changing it because they said too many drugs and stuff were being introduced, so they started going through vendors.
Yeah.
Now you could get the package from a vendor. Basically, same thing. The vendor was a store on the outside street that would send you. Now they would send you the stuff, the chicken in the can,
All the pouch food.
the pouch food.
chocolates.
Yes. So but in the whole, you can only get one once a year.
Yes.
And so how long? I mean, and when you haven't, so anytime outside of that, you're eating the nasty state food.
Or you can get store, but your store is limited. So on
Right.
the main line, you get, now it's $220. It used to be $180, but you could get $45 in the hole.
So when you get a package, now you have
everything.
this hard decision to either eat it up in 2-3 days or
Mhm.
try to stretch it and make it last, which is extremely hard.
It's hard, yeah.
Right.
I was always good at rationing my food.
Right.
Half a soup, fold it up.
Half a soup.
I'd ration that shit out, but
Wow.
some people can't do that.
Damn.
Right.
Well, okay, this is a question I've always wondered. Why is it that the whites and the Southerners get along, it seems like, so well, but not necessarily like the blacks? Like, is there a reasoning behind that?
There's like a historical reasoning for it. So the reason the gangs formed was to protect each other from each other, right? So Southerners and blacks don't get along because of turf wars on the streets. It was money, there was money exchange. This corner, we wanted this for dealing. We wanted this area, so there was gang and turf wars on the streets, and that carried in inside. I feel like whites just kind of followed suit. Underlying like internal racism for white people made it really easy to do that, so they followed suit. But there was also a lot of fights. The reason the white gang Aryan Brotherhood formed was because there was a lot of whites who were just citizens that were in prison that would get victimized by larger black dudes, and so they're like, we don't fuck with them, we ain't gonna fuck with them, and that keeps this line. And they would enact, the way that the whites did it was violence would tread the path, like nobody's gonna fuck with us as long as we are the most violent. And that's really where it came from. But ultimately there's no real reason today for it not to happen.
Do you have any funny moments that stood out that you remember? Something that it would just make you start crying with laughter?
Funny moments? I don't. Not offhand. I can't think of one. Maybe we could circle back to that on a different occasion.
Right.
Most definitely.
Yeah.
What's the craziest shit you've seen in prison that stands out to this day that's like, damn, that shit was vicious?
So I saw this dude, and he had commented, he said the wrong thing in the shower. You share showers in prison, I think everybody knows that. He said the wrong thing to a dude who was in a position of power, talked about someone who had done something wrong to him on the streets. He said he'd tell on them, right? And this was on the 4-yard in Centinela. So he went to church, he came out from church, he walked through the fence, we were all posted over here, and one dude ran up and just booked him 4 times in the neck. And you could see, I mean, for one, the knives were huge in Centinela. For two, you could see the hole open up and just blood pour down. And I thought that was a bit of an overreaction. Honestly, like, that was an overreaction.
Damn.
He was just randomly talking.
Right.
But
So dude died?
yeah, I don't think he died. The human body's incredibly resilient.
So he could have been slapped around a couple lefts
Sure.
and rights, but the dude
Wanted
took it
make
to
a
the
statement.
extreme.
Yeah, and he
Right.
made a call and made that happen, and it, probably got him some power.
And one quick question, I know in this day and age, right, with these youngsters and how things is, people nowadays are quick to label each other snitches.
Oh,
and,
for sure.
And on the streets, it's kind of like it's kind of
That's what
cool.
yeah.
But can you please explain how deadly and how powerful that word is in prison when you label
for
someone
sure.
a snitch and you don't have the paperwork
yeah.
to prove that he's a snitch? How powerful is that word?
That word, so you have, in the California prison system, 98,000 people. The majority, I don't know numbers, but I would say at least 50 to 60% are there because their crimies told on them
Or
someone
right.
told on them. So there's an incredible animosity towards just the idea of doing that, and it's always been that way because whole systems of street organization have came down behind people telling. So like, you definitely have to have paperwork. If you don't have paperwork, you don't say it. If you say it and you don't have paperwork, then either A, they'll say, well, then you have to handle it on your
Right,
own,
so
or B, you get handled.
So if you call a person a snitch,
You better be equipped to go and deal with it.
whooping his ass. And I have one quick question that's kind of a little not necessarily on this topic, but real quick while it's on my mind. Prison is so based on respect. What was it like coming paroling or coming home now in a society that seemed like it's so cool to be disrespectful?
I prepared myself for it. Like, I always had a fear when I was inside of like someone cutting in front of me in the store or bumping into me and not saying anything. It's happened a few times. My reaction varies. Like, sometimes it'll be like I'll have that old rage where you're like, how the fuck, how dare they? But ultimately, like, I learned, luckily, before I came home, that the idea of respect that people have in prison is more of an entitlement. It's like, you are going to treat me how I want to be treated.
Right.
And I think that comes from being fucking hammered into the ground so long in your life. Like, I'm gonna stand up and you're gonna respect what I say.
Right.
So but yeah, it is definitely, it's a scary world. A lot of people cutting you off on the road, a lot of people cutting in front of you in grocery stores, looking at your girl, whatever the case may be, and having to accept it is actually like a fruit of life. You know what I mean?
Hey, and look, y'all, I gotta say that's me. I'm guilty. I'll be in the supermarket, my head be everywhere, man. You've been locked down, man. There's so many fine women out there. So if you catch me staring at your girl, I apologize. Yeah, but okay. So on a scale of 1 to 10, right? How do you think the disrespect is out here compared to prison?
Oh, it's got to be like a a 10. It's
Right.
high.
Right.
It's definitely high because people just don't think the same as
Right.
you do in there.
And they're not necessarily cognizant of what they're doing.
Yeah.
So you think it's an intentional disrespect, or they're just not aware of what
They're
we're
just not
used
paying
to?
attention. Like
Right.
in there, you pay attention to everything. You move slower.
Right.
You're watching everything. And out here, the majority of people haven't had to live a life where that is required.
Right. Okay, so Hefe, hit us with another one, man.
What okay, this is another one for both of y'all. What would you do? What would you do to kill time? What are some things you do to kill time?
I wrote a lot. I wrote long treaties, letters. I read, like, I used to read like 4 books a day. Not finish 4 books a day, but I had my morning study book, I had an afternoon study book, I had an evening, so 3 books, an evening leisure read, and like I always study. I was always really big on studying. Bullshitting, card games, pinochle. You play pinochle?
Yes, sir.
Hell yes. Pinochle, chess. I have a chessboard right back there. Chess was a big one. A lot of that stuff just kills time. And when you're in the hole of the shoe, you can still do these. You can't do pinochle, but you can still call out chess numbers, and people will move boards. So, I mean, I stayed pretty busy. I'd wake up hella early. Working out was a big one for me, always. So that was for me. Working out, chess, reading, studying.
Okay, and a quick question. How many, because a person said something on one of my pages, on my YouTube page in a comment, maybe a couple months back or whatever, but he said, wow, you were in prison for so long, why are you so little? Well, first of all, I'm 185 pounds and I'm solid up under this motherfucking t-shirt. Second of all, what's the, because they have a perception that everybody in prison works out. What do you think the percentage is of people who work out in prison? Of the whole population, what percentage of in your estimation?
30-40% tops.
Right, because I wouldn't necessarily think it's that high. You guys who have never been to prison, you have this concept of everybody in prison trying to get big, but it's really not a lot of that.
It's not. No, and then also you're given such small portions.
Right.
And even if you get packages in canteen, the food is not healthy. You
Right.
can't bulk. Like,
You don't have the nutrients.
you don't have the proteins and nutrients that you need. Like you can get
To
out
really
here.
work out, yeah.
No weights. There's no weights.
There's
you have
no weights,
sandbags
right.
and shit or water bags or whatever. But there's no weights. So yeah, you can't get big like that.
Right. And so what he says is, especially okay, because in 1990, when I got to prison in 1996, they was taking away the weights, So, but what he said is sandbags. People will go to the yard. They'll bring it, even if they haven't bring it in cup by cup of sand, till eventually they'll get maybe a 30-40 pound bag of sand. They'll tie it up, fix it up, take their t-shirts. People are extremely ingenuitive in prison, and so they'll make these supplemental type weights, to get some type of bulk, but they don't bulk you up in prison no more like they used to once they took the weights. And like you said, they don't feed you nowhere nearly as good now as they did back in '96 when I came as well. So the portions are small and horrible. But okay, for me, what I've done in prison, I do a lot of different things. I play a lot of basketball, I read, I play a little chess. I don't have a lot of attention span. Some dudes will play chess literally all day long. I'm good for about 30-40 minutes, then I'm moving on to the next thing. I go
one
play
game.
Yeah, I go
do
play
one, maybe a run back.
Maybe about 2 or 3 games I'm good. But some people, they want to gamble and play chess all day long. I can't do that. So then I maybe go play pinochle for a little bit. I'd go do different things, exercise. I loved reading, and one thing I regret now is not keeping me a list of all the books I read. Because I read, like he said, I read books, man. I'd go to the law library, and the library and the law library is in the same part, it's just different sections. But I would go to the library and I'd check out books and I'd read, maybe if the book was good, I could read a book maybe in a day or two, depending on, in some prisons, the libraries are better than others. So that's what I've done, different little things that keep me occupied in pastime. Like he said, write letters, write raps, that type of stuff.
Hell yeah.
What explain your highest moment and your lowest moment when you're in there. So I know when it's low, it's probably very low. But sometimes when it's high, it's like rather that you in a cell with your buddies drinking Pruno or whatever. Just what is it?
Every time I went to the hole, because you start at nothing. It's like being in prison. Because you get booked into county jail, you got nothing to show for it. The exact same thing. And every single time I went to the hole, it was like the lowest feeling. You literally get depressed if you lose a phone. You feel like you get like a phantom phone vibrations and shit. Those are low points for me. The highest point was, I'd have to say, getting out, because I didn't you know, it wasn't something I'd envisioned for the majority of my time. And then I did some work, and I was able to make it to that date. Getting married was another point that was a really high point for me. I got married in CTF Soledad, and I got married in the visiting room, and it was a high point for me. Those are my highs and those are my lows.
That's dope. That's dope.
But let me hit that to my
hit that. Let's hear
my honestly, I'd have to think for a long time to think about my high point. I guess I would like to say, well, everybody would probably say, well, since you had life, your high point would be getting out. But outside of when the guy told me at the board hearing, okay, you've been found suitable, that was my little kind of high point. But once I went back to the yard, because once you're a lifer and they tell you you're going home, it's still a 5-month process, and they could take your date. And to me, I'd been in prison at that point so long, 24 years, it still felt nothing changed outside of I knew they said I was going home. But I've been doing that for so long, I didn't feel it, you know. And so my low point, I would say, you know, honestly, was when it was time for me to go to the board. And that was because at that point, up until then, you know, I think I was in prison maybe, I don't know, 15, 16 years before I went to the parole board to try to gain my my freedom. But it was at that point that I realized how much control I had gave someone else over my life. When it was time for me to initially go to the board, I had no idea what to say. I had no idea how I was going to get out of prison. So it scared the living hell out of me. And I actually postponed it for 3 times. You know, it was time, hey, you go to the board so you can seek your potential freedom. Tell them I'll be back in a year. You know, because I didn't know what the hell I was going to say. Yeah. I didn't think they would ever let me out of prison. But that was my low point, just realizing I gave these people, because up until then, I thought that it was part of the territory. It came with gang banging. I didn't think I'd get a life sentence, but I knew it possibly could happen. So when it happened, I accepted it. But just the fear of now going in there and fighting for my life was definitely my low point.
For sure.
Right.
I've always heard of something called the Turner Diaries. Is that something like part of the literature you read?
For sure. Absolutely. Turner Diaries and Hunter.
Hunter?
Yeah.
Okay. This is something I strongly believe. I believe because like my family members like, you know, like gangbangers and stuff. I believe that the movie Colors kind of like it kind of like welcomed the next generation, right, to come join. Do you feel like American History X probably played like a similar role towards like, you know,
I don't know. I mean, that could be a perspective. I think also in American History X, there's a really amazing story of someone backing away from it, the consequences he was willing to endure to back away from that shit, and what really happens in prison. Even though like some of that story's farce, that's not really how prison is, but some of it's really, really true. I don't know if it welcomed them. It did definitely like make Hollywood a certain culture, but I mean, yeah, I mean maybe I'd say yes and no to that, to answer directly.
Okay.
And then I got a quick question, Grandma. I know we've been here for a minute. I see you keep glancing.
I'm getting notifications.
Oh, okay.
And Apple Watches, you know, they do the notifications.
Okay.
Sorry.
Okay. So, what's the big difference? Well, actually, don't worry about that. Is it hard for people to become like the Aryan Brotherhood, whereas like the Hispanics, you have like the Mexican Mafia and the Southsiders? And it seems like with the whites, we have the Aryan Brotherhood and the skinheads. Is that like a harder thing to like become?
Yeah, I mean it's difficult to get involved in that. I don't know if I can go into that much detail on it. But yeah, I mean it is a difficult. There's specific things that you got to do to get involved in that.
Oh, okay. I don't know if you can answer this, but the homegirl Steph told me to ask you this. It's 2 things. Gnarliest wound you've ever given someone.
I've ever given someone. Well, I mean, my case was slitting someone's throat, and I think that was the gnarliest one that I've ever given.
Damn. I don't get this. Can you bowl?
Can I bowl?
Yeah.
I can bowl.
Dog, because I guess there's a song called "Take the Skinheads Bowling" or some shit.
I've never heard that. Yeah, that's funny, but I can bowl.
That's what she texted me. She's like, "Ask him, can he bowl?" I'm like, "All right, whatever." All right, and this is my last one, and I've been dying to ask you this one. I see you got some serious ink. Would you mind showing it off for the camera quick?
A lot of it is not. I could show some.
Yeah.
So, all of this goes all the way under and around. and then all of this, and there's this.
Dang, that is so crazy. It looks kind of cool. I ain't gonna lie.
It's all right, but I mean,
artwork
the
is
bad part
crazy.
about the ink is now that none of it means anything to me.
Yeah.
And it's impossible to cover up. So I've been trying to think of cover-up ideas for the ink, because I go to the beach or the pool and I'm insulting people that I'm around, and it's not even the life that I live anymore. Now, if I was still committed to that, then I'd be like, okay, but that isn't. I mean, I live a completely opposite life now.
So you can't enjoy going to the beach.
I still try to, and you know,
like
if
that.
people ask questions, I'm willing to have conversations. I haven't dealt with any like hostility or weird
that's good
looks,
then.
but I mean, you always think there's that, you know?
Right. And then I have a question, because I know at when I was on the run in 1993, and I had some neighbors of mine who had some, you know, skinhead or white supremacist tattoos, and I immediately formed an opinion about them. But come to find out, they were cool. You know, they no longer believed in that ideology. Actually, I threw my my cousin in the pool. Little cousin, he couldn't swim. I jumped in to try to grab him. He was too heavy. One of them jumped in actually and helped me.
Oh, that's awesome.
But when we see this stuff, we have a tendency to prejudge, even though we
For
shouldn't.
sure.
So do you get any type of backlash or
I imagine the backlash,
Right.
and I think that that's worse than it actually happening, really. But no one, like I said, no one said anything to me. But in my head, I know what this stuff means, and I know that it's an affront to the majority of people in our society. And since, you know, like if I still believed in it, then I'd be like, whatever, let it fly. But I don't. I spoke at a panel for BLM and White People for Black Lives in LA. And one of the other panelists was a rabbi, a woman named Rabbi Susan. And so we're sitting in the green room, we're waiting for the panel to start. And she looks at my arm and she goes, "Those are war dates. Every single one of these is a Nazi war date." And I said, "Yeah." And she goes, "That hurts me." And I had
Could
to
you elaborate a little bit more? Because
Yeah.
I don't quite understand.
Yeah. So every date is a date in National Socialist history.
Okay.
And I have, I think, 8 of them on me. So 3/12/1938 is the night of Auschwitz, like where they annexed Austria and made it part of Greater Germany. 1/30/1933 is when Hitler became Reich Chancellor, so on and so forth. Every day represents something.
A significant moment in white history.
In National Socialist, specifically German history. And her being a rabbi, obviously this is incredibly insulting. And the way she voiced it was that hurt me, and that affected me in a way. Like after that, I didn't even know how to respond. I said, "I'm sorry, but this is where I was and not who I am right now."
Now I've heard, in prison, of course, you have the Hispanics. They speak Spanish. You've had some black inmates who learn Swahili. I've heard of some white inmates speaking German. Did you happen to learn any type of
I did not.
second language? Have you ever
I know
ran
more
across-
Spanish than anything, just because I'm from Southern California. It's a prerequisite down here. So
Right. So have you ran across any people who did speak any German or?
yeah, absolutely. People study German or Latin, and they use those. Whole segments of the skinhead movement study Latin and say bring it back from being a dead language, and that's our root language. But I never engaged in any of that. I probably should have. I would have benefited from being bilingual, but
Right. Okay.
Okay. I have questions.
awesome.
Got anything, OG Chill?
Well, Well, okay, we mentioned earlier SNY yards and this and that, and so have you been around maybe people who were once a part of your collective who figured that, okay, this is too strenuous, or in your opinion, why do some people drop out? Because the rule is, I think the thought is that people drop out because, they had some smut on them or they done something heinous, but sometimes people just start figuring out this ideology is no longer for me, I no longer believe in this, but when you do drop out, in some instances, you're going to be frowned upon and pop it on that.
So back in the 90s, before I went to prison, SNY was a super rare thing. In 99, I'm not 100% sure, they created the first Soft 4, which was the first SNY, that was Calpad D Yard. And it was only for gang dropouts. That was the only people that could go there.
Right.
From that project that CDCR made, they determined that we need to do this for people who have sex offenses, people who have told on people, for people with high-profile cases like cops, the Menendez brothers, etc., and for other people who want to get away from that. We need to create a refuge for former gang members. That isn't what happened. What happened was people would build up debts and then just bounce. A lot of people really got tired of the same old shit. I mean, you were talking 50 years of the same thing continuously. And it gets tiresome, so they're like, I'm done with that, and they go over to SNY yard. The issue with SNY is there's more gangs on SNY yards than there are on GP yards.
Right. And
there's
I've
more
heard that
violence
some
on
of the
those yards.
SNY yards are
Way more
deadly than a regular yard.
I was in the hole at Salinas Valley, and they have 2 SNY yards and 2 GP yards or something like that. And they had a riot on one of the SNY yards with the Northern Riders and the 2-5ers.
And then, excuse me, once again, just for those who may have not understand, an SNY yard is a special needs yard, which an inmate who cannot be in general population where all the main inmates are housed, he'll go to a yard where he says, hey, I can't be here. But sorry to interrupt, go ahead.
Yeah, so I mean, now the CDCR has probably 70% of the prisons are SNY.
Right.
Just about every prison has an SNY yard, and there's more gangs there. So I went to Salinas Valley, I went to the hole, there was a riot between 2 SNY gangs, Northern Riders, 2-5ers.
So the SNY gangs on these yards who say, hey, I can't be on the main line,
They just create whole new gangs over there.
Too vicious. They go to these special need yards, and the gang stuff perpetuates, or they create new gangs.
Because some people just went to that side because they owed money.
Right.
They weren't done with any of that stuff. They weren't doing. Some
their
people
mentality
legitimately
hadn't
go
changed.
and just program, but yeah, their mentality hasn't changed.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so you were saying there was a riot?
There was a riot, and I mean, that was probably one of the most, that was more brutal than any riot I've ever been in. The people hella flighted off the yard. It was really, really bad. And one thing that I noticed from that, because I was in the cage yards, and they're yelling over top of our cage, like I noticed that the gang structure is not that different.
Right.
It's not. The stuff that they're fighting about is not that different. The things that they're doing is not that different. The mannerisms, the little terms that everything was pretty much the same. And I mean, there's a sense of disillusionment when you realize that it's just a bunch of hurt people trying to figure out a way to survive in a shitty environment. That's really what prison is.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, Graham, I deeply appreciate you coming on the show.
Thank you.
I appreciate you, man. I can obviously say we don't even have to ask you anything about your ideology in terms of, because if so, we wouldn't be here. You know, so you've changed.
Absolutely.
I like to commend you. Like I said, sometimes we all get caught up into things that when we're young, that we no longer approve of or endorse when we're older. You know what I'm saying? So I would like everybody out there just to be open-minded. You know, like I say, me, I no longer agree with a lot of the things I done when I was younger, and it's, you know, we just all, you know, evolve, and that's what life is about: evolving, changing, you know, thinking about some of our old mistakes, and just, you know, moving forward and trying to be positive, man. So, like I say, Graham, you're actually my first guest on here. I deeply appreciate you coming on here, man. I had a joy talking to you, and I just have a good feeling about this, that the crowd is gonna want you back. You know,
awesome.
I definitely believe everybody's gonna want you back. Anything you want to say in closing?
Just thank you for your time. I appreciate it. I appreciate you. I appreciate you guys. And if you want to hear more about the work that I do today with Success Stories program, we challenge patriarchy and toxic masculinity on a large scale throughout the prison system, offering groups and outside of prisons as well, in transitional houses, group homes, youth organizations. So look us up on Facebook at Success Stories program, or on all other social media platforms. That's Instagram, Twitter, or TikTok at Prison Feminism.
All right, hey, thank you guys. And oh, you know what? I forgot to tell you guys. Resume normal program.
That's right.